For a decade, ICE road truckers turned ordinary long-haul drivers into household names by putting them behind the wheel on some of the most punishing stretches of frozen highway on the planet. Millions watched them fight whiteouts, cracking ice, and impossible deadlines every week. But what the cameras never showed was what happened after the trucks were parked and the film crews went home. Some of the show's biggest names never made it to see the series return for its long-awaited revival. Others found themselves fighting battles far more complicated than any frozen lake, courtrooms, hospital wards, and grief that outlasted any winter. This is a look at where the real ICE road truckers cast ended up, built entirely on documented, on-the-record events. Darryl Ward joined ICE road truckers in its sixth season and quickly became one of its most recognizable faces. Born in Deer Lodge, Montana, in 1964, Ward came from a family that had hauled freight for generations, and that background showed in the confidence he carried on camera. He wasn't a rookie learning the ropes. He was a veteran who made brutal winter routes look almost casual, and audiences responded to his easy charm and no-nonsense attitude. On August 28, 2016, Ward's story ended abruptly. He had just finished making appearances at the Great American Trucking Show in Dallas and was flying back toward Missoula, Montana, to begin work on a planned television project about recovering wrecked aircraft. The small Cessna 182 he was riding in, piloted by 56-year-old Mark Malotz, went down near Rock Creek Airport along Interstate 90. Witnesses told investigators the plane appeared stable on its approach before suddenly banking sharply and clipping a stand of trees. Both men died in the crash and the fire that followed. The National Transportation Safety Board spent close to a year investigating and ultimately found no mechanical failure in the aircraft, leaving the exact cause of the sudden turn unresolved. Ward was 52 years old. His death landed hard on the production. The History Channel dedicated the remainder of that season's episodes to him, and for longtime viewers, his absence changed the texture of the show for good. When ICE road truckers finally returned to television after an 8-year gap, Ward was the name most associated with the version of the show that no longer existed. Proof that no amount of skill on the ice can account for everything life throws at a driver once the cameras stop rolling. Not every cast member's story gets the same spotlight. Jordan Fedosoff worked as an assistant driver during the show's second season, a role that put him in the trucks without necessarily making him a headline name. He never chased fame from the series and largely stayed out of the public eye in the years that followed. In February 2020, Fedosoff died after developing serious respiratory complications following a surgery. Details about the specific circumstances were never widely publicized, but former castmates, including Rick Yem, publicly acknowledged his passing, and friends and family organized a memorial gathering in his honor. His death is a reminder that the show's ripple effects reached well beyond its most famous drivers. Plenty of people who worked those routes never became household names, but their loss mattered just as much to the people who knew them. Art Burke arrived on ICE Road Truckers in its 7th season and stayed for 5 years, developing a reputation as one of the show's more colorful personalities, someone who could make even the tensest ice crossing feel entertaining. When the show wrapped in 2017, Burke largely disappeared from public view, and what happened next had nothing to do with trucking. In November 2018, Burke was inside his Yellowknife apartment attempting to produce a cannabis concentrate known as shatter, a process that requires large amounts of liquid butane, an extremely flammable substance. The butane ignited, triggering an explosion powerful enough to blow the bathroom door off its hinges and lift the apartment ceiling. The blast caused well over $60,000 in damage to a housing building that mainly served older, previously homeless residents, and displaced tenants had to be put up in hotels during repairs. Burke himself suffered burns across roughly 40% of his body and spent 12 days in the hospital recovering. The legal process that followed took nearly 2 years. In February 2020, Burke pleaded guilty to a charge of arson by negligence, a relatively rare charge in Canadian courts. His sentencing hearing was delayed multiple times, including one instance where Burke was late to his own video appearance, a moment that visibly frustrated the presiding judge. When sentencing finally came in October 2020, Burke received 18 months of house arrest, a term he was permitted to serve partly from inside the cab of his truck so he could keep working. The judge accepted the joint sentencing recommendation from prosecutors and the defense, but noted on the record that he considered it a lenient outcome given the scale of the damage and the risk to residents. Burke was also ordered to pay tens of thousands of dollars in restitution. He has since kept a low profile, living on Prince Edward Island. Hugh Rowland, known to fans as the Polar Bear, was one of the defining faces of ICE Road Truckers from its very first season in 2007. Alongside Alex Debogorski, he was one of the most consistent presences in the show's early years, known for his gruff humor and his willingness to lecture rookies about respecting the ice. Rowland was famously unbothered by the cameras, once telling producers that he didn't expect anyone to actually tune in to watch trucks crawl up and down frozen roads, a prediction that turned out to be spectacularly wrong. Rowland's time on the show came to an end after a 2014 accident that had nothing to do with ice roads at all. He was riding as a passenger in a vehicle driven by one of the show's producers, Will Morrison, when the vehicle reportedly went off the road and crashed into trees. Rowland said the injuries he sustained, concentrated in his lower body, were severe enough to end his trucking career. He later filed a lawsuit against Morrison alleging reckless driving, and court filings described the toll the injuries took beyond his job, including strain on his marriage. The outcome of that lawsuit was never made public, suggesting it was either settled privately or resolved outside of court records that are publicly accessible. Rowland stepped away from both trucking and television after the accident. Public reporting indicates he has since focused on other business ventures and spending time with family, largely out of the spotlight he once didn't think anyone was watching in the first place. Todd Dewey built his reputation on ICE Road Truckers, starting in Season 7, as one of the fastest and most dependable drivers when it came to chaining up rigs in brutal Yukon conditions. He wasn't the loudest personality on the show, but his consistency on some of the most dangerous routes earned him respect from both fans and fellow drivers. In January 2019, Dewey was driving a logging truck southbound on Highway 101 near Shelton, Washington, when a sedan traveling in the opposite direction crossed the center line and struck his truck head-on. The two occupants of the car, 65-year-old Stephen John Jacobson and a 64-year-old female passenger, were both killed instantly. Dewey walked away from the crash physically unharmed. Investigators noted that neither drugs nor alcohol appeared to be a factor, and reporting at the time indicated the victim's family did not pursue charges against Dewey, since the collision was not considered his fault. Even so, Dewey has spoken about the emotional weight of surviving a crash that claimed 2 other lives, and he shared his gratitude for well-wishers on social media in the days that followed. Despite that trauma, Dewey never fully stepped away from the road. After years out of the spotlight, he returned for the show's revival season, rejoining familiar faces and taking on the ice once again. Proof that for some of these drivers, walking away from the job permanently is easier said than done. Of all the names associated with ICE Road Truckers, Lisa Kelly is arguably the one most people picture first. She joined the show in its 3rd season and became known for hauling loads that many assumed were out of reach for a driver her size, quickly dismantling assumptions about who belonged behind the wheel of a big rig on Alaska's most dangerous routes. She stepped away for a season at one point to recover from rib injuries sustained on the job, a reminder that even the show's biggest star wasn't immune to the physical cost of the work. Kelly also went into business with Darryl Ward, and when he died in 2016, she was left managing both her grief and the responsibilities of a shared company. She chose to keep the business running rather than walk away, continuing to haul freight in the years that followed. Unlike several of her castmates, Kelly's post-show life has been notably free of legal trouble or scandal. Public reporting consistently describes her as still active in trucking, married, and largely out of the tabloid spotlight that followed some of her former colleagues. No cast member is more closely tied to ICE Road Truckers than Alex Debogorski, the only driver to appear across all of the show's original seasons. Long before television found him, Debogorski had already built a reputation as someone who had survived more close calls than most people encounter in a lifetime, and that experience showed in his calm, methodical approach to some of the most treacherous stretches of ice in North America. Since the show's original run ended, Debogorski has stayed remarkably active and remarkably scandal-free. He has continued public speaking engagements about trucking history, published a memoir detailing his decades on the road, and taken part in newer media projects aimed at trucking audiences. Unlike several of his former castmates, there is no documented legal trouble or personal tragedy tied to his name in the years since the cameras stopped rolling. His story since the show has been one of continuity rather than crisis, built around family and a genuine love for the profession that made him famous. Put together, the honest picture of the Ice Road Truckers cast in 2025 is less about scandal for its own sake and more about how unevenly life can treat people who spent years building a public image around danger and control. Daryl Ward and Jordan Fedisoff never got the chance to see how their stories would have continued. Art Burke's brush with the law had nothing to do with ice roads at all, and Hugh Rowland's career ended in a vehicle he wasn't even driving. Todd Dewey walked away from a crash that took 2 other lives and still chose to return to trucking years later. Meanwhile, drivers like Lisa Kelly and Alex Debogorski show that it was entirely possible to walk away from the show with reputations intact and lives that, while far from easy, avoided the tragedies that defined some of their castmates. The real lesson isn't that the ice itself was the most dangerous part of the job. It's that the risks these drivers carried didn't end when the trucks were parked for the season. Plane crashes, courtroom battles, and highway collisions proved just as unpredictable as any frozen lake, and for a cast defined by its willingness to face danger head-on, that unpredictability turned out to be the truest thing the show ever captured.